Basketball came easy for Orlando Ward as life came easy. From athletics to academics, he excelled, a young man with big dreams. In fact, everything about Orlando was big.
Huge hands, one of the greatest physical sort of the body and jumping ability I think I'd ever seen.
Huge personality. When O walked into the room, you knew he was there. And his laugh, his smile, very infectious.
But injuries are no laughing matter. Orlando tore up his knee sophomore year, and for a guy who'd never dealt with any real adversity, it was a serious setback, which had ramifications nobody could have seen coming.
I had defined myself so closely to basketball that when it was taken away, even temporarily or partially like it was at that point, I didn't have an anchor. I didn't have a direction. Things stopped mattering. I was lost.
Guys like that and personalities like that, being trusting, you know, I think just fell in with some of the wrong folks, got into some of the wrong things.
The higher up you are, the further down you have the fall. And he had a long way to tumble.
You started off thinking you're in control of it, and halfway through, you're not driving a car anymore.
He had changed. That infectious laugh wasn't there. That warm personality was starting to disappear a little bit. You knew that there was some kind of chemical dependency, but you weren't sure what it was.
You don't expect someone you know, an athlete, someone from Stanford. These are not your typical stories that you hear. And this was just not part of my world and probably not part of a lot of people's world.
But it was Orlando's world, and it continued on a most destructive path. After he left Stanford and joined the workforce, things went downhill further and faster.
We worked very, very hard, but we also played very hard. By early evening, we're in happy hour. But for me, happy hour became a happy night, happy couple of days. The drinking and the use of drugs at that point became such the norm that it became what I was working for. It began a spiral that lasted about 17 years.
As the booze and the drugs methodically consumed Orlando's existence, his family saw it, his friends saw it, but the addict could not see it.
Clearly, they're the ones with the problem. It wasn't me. You guys need to lighten up. I got this.
After we'd been out of school for a while, you know, I do remember getting a phone call. I remember he'd been staying with a couple of the guys on the team, you know, trying to get himself together a little bit, calling and asking, you know, for money or something like that. And at that point, it was like, you know, you wanted to, but at the same time, you kind of had I think I know where this might be going.
He asked me for money, and I think I gave him enough to get by with whatever he needed at that time. I was sympathetic, but I didn't see him as pathetic. But he was in a pathetic situation.
I'd be exhausted without resources. I've sold everything, pawned everything, can't do anything else. And I'd call my mom up and give her some story and have her wire me some money. And my mom, with a clarity in her voice that I had never heard before, said, "Orlando, I don't know what you're doing. I don't really know what's going on with you, but I know we didn't raise you that way, and you need to get it together." She hung up. Countless broken relationships, finally culminating in homelessness and living in this cardboard box.
It's right about here, and this is kind of where I set myself up. Cardboard box, and I could run down the street over here and unload a couple of trucks for a couple of bucks to get something to eat, but it was right here where I started approaching my bottom. I can remember many a nights where, you know, I had that homicidal and suicidal thoughts at the same time. You know, I just wanted everybody gone, and then I wanted me gone. It's a miracle that I didn't get completely swallowed up by these streets and lose myself or lose any kind of faculty at all.
That miracle truly came to light on April 18th, 1999, a date etched into Orlando's mind as a birthday would be for most because, in a sense, it was his rebirthday, his sobriety date.
Recovery started happening for me. I can remember sitting, I had my cardboard laid out, I had my pallets laid out that kind of raised the cardboard off the ground so, you know, the rats could go underneath and not over the top. And I looked up and I began to talk to God. And I thanked Him for all that I had in my life, all I had been exposed to. And I remember telling Him at that point that I can't do it anymore. I'm tired. I know I'm gonna die here on Skid Row, addicted to drugs and alcohol. And I was okay with it. It was that moment of surrender, of giving up on this fight, that I think became the cornerstone to the recovery I would experience, you know, later on as I went through the Midnight Mission and the many things I went through afterwards.
And so it was. After 17 years of addiction, Orlando found himself here at the Midnight Mission. He came in as a client, transitioned to a part-time and ultimately a full-time employee. He left more than a decade later as Vice President of Operations, the highest-ranking mission official ever to come from the streets.
At that point, what in my life seemed like a curse became a blessing, because those vivid memories of being out there and being cold and not wanting to exist anymore came to bear on the new thoughts that could influence policy, that could influence legislation, that could maybe bring a different voice to the narrative that would make it real.
That voice is now heard from Skid Row to the state capitol to the nation's capital. Orlando took a job last year as Director of Community Affairs at Volunteers of America, Los Angeles. Incredibly, he spends much of his time on the very streets that almost swallowed him whole, helping others try to conquer their demons.
It's easy for me to come down here. It hurts me to see the degree of suffering, but I really feel empowered based on what I've been pulled through to give something back.
He really cares about the people he comes in contact with here. He doesn't have any ulterior motive other than to see people get freedom from the disease, and that's why when he walks down the street here, you have people call out his name, because he's had contact with almost everyone down here.
Don't even stop. You got my money.
Orlando's passion is now divided between his street family and his real family. As for his former passion, basketball, well, those huge hops are a thing of the past, but the competitive spirit remains strong, and it just might have saved his life.
Orlando was facing an opponent, not necessarily, one that he had to try to score on, right? But there was something in front. There was something confronting him in his life.
It's just like a shooter in basketball. You can't keep remembering the shot that you missed. You have to look ahead at the shot that you're going to make.
It's so funny, I hear, coaches and parents and everybody saying, "You're doing so good, you're doing so good," and I'm like, that's great. But you know what's most gratifying for me? Is an associate, a buddy, a friend that's still out there that will come up and say, "You're doing real good, and one day I'm gonna be there." That gives me the purpose. That gives me the grounding. I know I'm where I'm supposed to be.